Before we get going into your Hockey IQ podcast episode, I want to thank our sponsor, Rapid Shot. Rapid Shot is the smart shooting lane. It's like a batting cage for hockey players. Very cool. Tracks your shot in three ways: accuracy, shot speed, and reaction time. Easy to use. Actually, I used it when I played and was growing up. Very easy. Simply scan your phone in, select your settings, and start shooting. You can see your stats on the app and online. You can check them out at rapidshot.com. Great small business. I actually grew up with one of the owner's sons and have played with all the family members by now, just in local pickups here in Ohio. Very cool local business. Awesome product. I love it. I know quite a few NHLers have them in their homes. A lot of D1 programs have it at their rinks. So you have to check this out. Rapidshot.com. Check it out. Rapid Shot, thank you so much for sponsoring our podcast.
Today on the podcast, we're happy to bring on Scott Powers from the Athletic Chicago, the number 2 athletic hockey writer, as he calls himself in the during the podcast. I think he was the second person hired. We had an awesome chat with Scott here. We talk a lot about the Blackhawks, the Steel, but also his foray into covering hockey wasn't his first love, and I thought that was a really interesting anecdote just about his journey into covering hockey for a living. Greg, what did you take away?
He's got a lot of great stories. You can tell he's a quality writer, and you can see why he was number 2 hire at the Athletic. I really liked how he is dug in and asked good questions of guys like Belfry, Kane, built those relationships, Ryan Hardy of Chicago Steel, and really able to convey those. I know he was one of the main reasons I signed up for the Athletic, and I would make sure that we all sign up for the Athletics. It's a really great service, and the writers they have are phenomenal. And they get into the good technical details that you're not really going to get with most services. So I liked how he gets in the details. What about you?
Yeah, I concur. And I'll say this for our listeners. It's a little bit different just because it's so heavy Blackhawks and Steel. So it's a little bit like less of the traditional like hockey IQ type stuff. However, we had a really interesting conversation about integrating development as opposed to keeping them isolated, as in, a coaching staff coaches and a skills coaches. And a lot of times the two aren't married, and therefore there's a little bit of a fracture. And it was really interesting to hear his perspective on how different teams are able to merge the two. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yep, that was great. And then just hearing about his experience writing with Daryl Belfry, who we've had on the podcast in the past, really good stuff. So I'm excited to share this. Let's get into it with Scott Powers.
Today on the podcast, we're pleased to bring on Scott Powers from the Athletic Chicago. Scott, how's it going today?
Good. Thanks for having me, guys.
First things first, talk to us a little bit about how you got into covering hockey, both with the ESPN and now at the Athletic.
Yeah, it's I hated hockey growing up. Like I grew up in Chicago, and hockey was something where the neighbors had some sticks, and once a year we took them out of the garage and we pulled them out and played street hockey, and then put them away the next day. And so this was dumb. And my dad wasn't a fan, so we didn't go to games. And there were some rough periods there growing up with the Blackhawks too. And I never skated, and it wasn't accessible. So I don't know if I actively disliked hockey, but just it's not something in my life. And I covered high school basketball and college basketball and all those things. And I was doing that for ESPN, and ESPN decided to move away from their local coverage, and, it was either lose a job or start doing some pro stuff. And so they had me do backup on the Bulls and the Chicago Bears. And then they moved our Blackhawks writer over to the Cubs, Jesse Rogers. And, it was during the lockout, and they said, when the Blackhawks come back, you can help out with the Blackhawks. And, I took it very literally that I was going to help out, but I probably should have realized that we didn't have anyone else to cover it. So I became our Blackhawks beat writer, and God bless anyone who read my coverage for those first couple of years. I was just I didn't know much about hockey. So it's the fact that I got actually hired by the Athletic to cover hockey, and I'm asked to do podcasts like this is if you'd asked me. This was 2013, so 7 years ago. If this was my life, I probably would have been slightly angry and never leaves you. But here I am. Yeah. So it's been, it's been a path to kind of figure out hockey and, to embrace the sport. And certainly I've gotten beyond all those hurdles and at a different place in my hockey knowledge, I think, but that's been the fun part too, is kind of, like even at learning how to analyze the game and, the fact that I did a book with Daryl, just somebody with his hockey intellect and the fact that he led me into there and be a part of that process. It's, I feel like it's at least a testament to maybe how far I've come or I'm really good at tricking people one or the other. So.
Well, you went the right direction. So you're in Chicago, you get the genius that is Patrick Kane, and then Daryl Belfry's working with him, and you get to see Adam Nicholas. Not a bad way to start off. So I'm kind of curious on what that relationship has been like, and what are some things I'm always curious about new eyes into the sport that you picked up that's important. Just maybe some big things from you from an outsider's perspective of what is great about these geniuses that you're getting to work with.
Yeah, it was, that was the interesting part, was understanding, especially coming from mostly a basketball world where the athleticism is very easy to notice, right? Like you can tell who's athletic and who's not. And in hockey, it's different where they're not jumping out of the gym or anything like that, for me. So it was kind of understanding what the brilliance of certain players were and what the skills were. And certainly, when you see Ovechkin and why he's a great player, why Kane is, and then certainly, having covered Kane for 7-8 years, like you come to appreciate the vision, and then you talk to someone like Daryl, and you get an even greater appreciation of what he sees and how he sees the game and how Kane sees it, and certainly covering Panarin and Kane for a bit, it's I don't know if I appreciated that as much as I should have at the time, and then having Daryl put that in perspective, it's something, and it's interesting covering one team, so you're very much I feel like a lot of my hockey experience has been around the Blackhawks, which was probably good, in the fact that they were successful for a bit. Now they've been a little bit down for some years. So it's been interesting to cover that and seeing what's good and what works. And, I feel like I've had a pretty good crash course of the cap stuff, but then also the on ice stuff. And then, but a lot of it's just been asking questions and being curious. I think that's been the fun part about this job too, is that, like when Panarin was here, I was really interested in his one-timer and trying to take a deep dive into that. And, ESPN, I had a lot of freedom, and with The Athletic, I have even more freedom where, I've done stories on why guys, tape their sticks a certain way, or, DeBrincat did a story with me 2 years ago and analyzing every goal he scored and what he saw. And Kane and I were doing the same thing until the pandemic came. And so it's fun to have. I think hockey's great because there's an access. I think just from a journalism perspective, there's an access that you don't get in every sport. With basketball, I covered enough Bulls where you get the same guy after practice, and you talk to that one guy, and everybody talks to that guy. And it's a little bit similar in baseball where the whole room's open and you get some time to talk to guys. And the nice thing about hockey is that obviously the fourth liner is not as important as a top liner, but he still plays a role, and those guys can be important. And covering guys like Marcus Kruger, you come to appreciate those too. So I think it's been fun to kind of dive into other parts of the locker room and talk to guys, and some of those guys are more willing to talk to you about breaking it down. Like Slater Cuckoo last year was really good, where I did a story analyzing what the Blackhawks did during a certain practice and what the drills meant and why they were doing it. And Cuckoo was really good about giving his time, kind of explaining and breaking it down. And so it's nice to have a big room like that and having access. And that's probably the thing I miss the most right now with this pandemic is there isn't access, and it's all all Zoom like this, and you're kind of dealing the same same questions with all the people. But yeah, I think from just as an outsider coming in, it took me a while to kind of understand. And Belfry talks about this in his book too, about when he was coming up and trying to figure out what was great and why. Like you compare other players and trying to figure out, how does this guy compare to another, and then you kind of are able to assess where the talent's at and what the gap is. And so it's I think I've gotten better at that too, where you see prospects come up and you're like, oh, this guy has amazing skill, but then when you start relating that to what level he's playing at, who he's playing against, and all those different things, like it's I feel like it's been a bit of an interesting learning curve for me over the last 7 years.
So within that learning curve, what are maybe some details of the game that you've really keened your eye towards or just stuck out when you're talking with players at this elite level and are able to articulate that, unlike most players.
Yeah, for sure. No, Kane obviously he sees it, but he didn't explain it. And I think doing that story on him explaining what he scored, how he scored the goals and what he saw, and there's deception there, and there's it's like this defenseman has his skate pointed this way, like and how they can just tap into just the slightest error that they can capitalize on, and for Kane too, just what Belfry talks about with the you kind of understand patterns and realizing that I'm in this certain pattern and this is what's likely to happen, and more often than not that I'm going to produce a point. Or so yeah, it's been interesting to I think even in the last year, working on this book with Daryl, it's all of a sudden you're counting puck touches and you're understanding time and space, and with Adam Nicholas too. Yesterday I was out at Chicago Steel practice, and they've certainly had Steel arguably ahead of the curve right now with player development. And I went out to a skills session, so they have a skills session in the morning, and then they have their regular practice where they're implementing specific skills, and then they put into the game setting. And obviously they tore up the USHL last year, and on their way again this year, and they potentially have the number one pick, Owen Power in this year's draft, and they had Brisson this past year, and obviously they're just mounting draft picks. But it's been talking to Adam Nicholas about what makes Owen Power interesting, and a 6'5", 6'6" defenseman, and how he skates, and how he sees time and space. And so yeah, it's you certainly come to appreciate the details of the skating, and puck management, and playing within space, and then just how few guys are able to do it, right? Like there aren't many players who can do what Kane does, and I think I've come to appreciate those little things over time.
So Scott, I met you last year down at Daryl's pro camp in Naples, Florida. Had a great time getting to meet you and hang out with you for the week there. And I'm curious if you could share with our listeners how the process of writing this book with Daryl came to be, maybe just like from the start to the finished product. And then I'll have some follow-ups to that, but maybe just like big picture, like how it came to be.
Yeah, I got to know Daryl a little bit just from having covered Kane, and asking him questions, and he gave me access a few times, and then I tweeted something about Daryl saying, I think I quote tweeted him saying like, this is one of the smartest minds in hockey. And after that, he sent me a DM saying, have you ever thought about doing a book? And this was a little bit over 5 years ago, and so we talked about it off and on, and neither one of us really neither one of us really did anything with it to make it go forward. And finally one day, Triumph, who we ended up publishing with, he had emailed me about doing another book, and I said, I'm not really interested in doing this, but I have this idea, and they jumped on it, and within a month I think we had a contract, and we weren't sure how to write it, and I left it up to Daryl how he wanted to do the process. I felt like I was just along with for the ride, So he had recorded most of it, and then sent me files, and then I edit those, and we kind of worked them into chapters. And so yeah, I just started a second book recently, and the process is a little bit different, but Daryl drove that boat, and I had some questions here and there, but he was so structured. And if you'd seen the emails he sent me with all these sheets and how his framework, and he's so organized with it, that it was a pretty simple process throughout.
Well, I think you're selling yourself short, because I saw like a flow chart of like what he wanted the book to look like, and it was like it might as well have been in a different language, just because to me, I mean, that's just like how his mind works. But maybe were there any instances like along the way where, I don't know, there was some sort of like pushback, or maybe not even that, like any sort of like collaborative like efforts that were like notable that are worth mentioning?
At the end we had to cut some of it, and he wasn't exactly happy with the last chapter. And then there was a really interesting part about Panarin that we ended up cutting. It didn't fit, and it was tough, because I like having covered Panarin and Kane, that was such a unique duo, but it didn't fit the section, and so we had to make some tough decisions. Daryl, the book was really long, and certainly I think the editor had to make some tougher decisions than I did, but for the most part, I think Daryl had a vision, what he wanted to write, and I had my suggestions or questions, but for the most part, we were both on the same page. And this felt like his book, like it is his book. I felt fortunate to be part of a project like this. I know that this is how smart Daryl is, and just how he's seen in the hockey community, and I feel like this book's gonna stand for a long time. So for my for me to have my name on it was certainly the motivation, and even getting just kind of learn about hockey through him. And last summer, as he sent me the chapters, I'd walk around Chicago just listening to him before I kind of got to him. So I felt like I had Daryl in my head for a whole summer, and just kind of appreciating, understanding what he wanted to get down, and then putting it on paper. And it was a pretty, it was a lot of work because the chapters, and it is a long book, and we certainly had to cut things down, but other than time consuming, it was a pretty easy process.
Well, again, you did an amazing job, and thank you for the contribution, because like you said, I think this is the type of book that'll pass the test of time, and you deserve some recognition for that as well. We'd be remiss if we didn't ask, though, what's your newest project, your second book?
I don't think I can. It's one
Oh, I gotcha.
now, so I can tell you off the record, but not on the record as of now. So whenever I can, I will certainly put it out there. But it's the contract's not even, I guess, official yet. So I don't want to probably count it. But yeah, it's something I think too will have some hopefully have some juice in the hockey community.
Okay, well, we're gonna spend the next 20 minutes just guessing what it is. I'm just kidding. I'm curious. This is going back a little bit, but we kind of got off the journalism thing. But I'm genuinely curious, because I've done some freelancing in the hockey writing space, and it's harder than people realize to come up with topics, especially like when there's nothing right now. December 2020, not a ton going on in like the actual hockey landscape of things. Like, what's your process like?
Speak for yourself, Dan. I got so many ideas coming out in our newsletter.
I'm talking about,
it's crazy. My idea bank is so long.
I'm talking about news.
All right, make some news for us.
The whole pandemic's been interesting, where unlike the news side, like in newspapers, you pretty much, a lot of the sports departments stepped away because like the news carries it, and with the Athletic, us being a sports only publication, like we still needed content, and the Blackhawks weren't giving us access early on. So for the first few months, we really dug deep into the well of a 10-year anniversary of the Blackhawks 2010 Cup, and I did a story on the Pony Inn, which was the bar the Blackhawks used to go to. So it was a lot of fun, and the logo debate was up there. So that was a project I had actually been working on since last year. So I finally was able to finish that story, and something I probably one of my proudest pieces of the year, and just the amount of work that took. And then it's just it's just like Adam Nicholas said he was in town, so I'm like, I really haven't been out of the house a whole lot, so I went out to the steel practice, and Owen Power was there, so I sat down with him, and a story coming out in the morning about just kind of what makes him special, and the fact that the Blackhawks could be in that conversation for him, considering just their schedule, and they don't have a proven goalie, and they could be in for that, could be in the lottery for someone like that. So. And then some news breaks. The Blackhawks reorganized the front office a little bit. Stan Bowman was made president of the hockey ops, and then we had John McDonough's firing, and so Kendall Coyne was hired recently by the Blackhawks, so we did a big piece on that. And
sure.
So some of it you rely on news, and then you try to maybe get a couple stories off of that, and nostalgia stuff has certainly been something we've dug deep into, and yeah. So and the fact there's two of us Blackhawks writers, Mark Lazarus also, that between the two of us, and then there's I hadn't taken any vacations, so it felt like a useless vacation, but I took some vacation time, and yeah, there's enough to get by. It's a little bit harder than when the season's going on. You're reacting to what's happening, and it was nice to have certainly the games and the Blackhawks advancing, one round made things a little bit easier for a bit too.
So how do you build trust with your athletes and the management, so you're able to get those stories and build those relationships? So, you're able to reach out to Nicholas, or he reached out to you and invite you out to practice, or you are able to go out to practice. I'm curious about how that operation works in that side of the business.
Yeah, and some of it's just people referring that, like my relationship with Belfry was what facilitated the relationship with Nicholas, and they come to trust you through them, and then maybe some of it's reputation a little bit now. It was interesting going from ESPN. I'd been laid off from ESPN and didn't have my contract renewed, and then I freelanced for a while, and then hired by the Athletic, and at that point the Athletic didn't exist, so I think I was a second employee, and then trying to explain to people what The Athletic was, and it doesn't have as much power as ESPN does. So the fact that The Athletic has kind of a standing now, it's interesting to see where it came from. But if I can call someone and say I'm from The Athletic now, and I think people trust you a little bit on that. With players, it's being around, it's writing about people fair. I think I think of always trying to be objective and fair, and sometimes bringing interesting ideas to them, and things they maybe don't usually think about, or it's not your ordinary question. So I think like any relationship, it's building trust. Then sometimes it's someone helping you have saying this guy's okay and vouching for me. And I think with Nicholas, and then I've gotten to know Ryan Hardy pretty well now through the Steel, and that was also through Belfry. And I've done a couple stories of Ryan Hardy, and it's there was early in the pandemic, he was pretty honest on Twitter, and he's a usually honest person. He's a really honest person about hockey. And we did a story about how he was probably the person, the most interesting Twitter person that you don't follow. And ironically, he's deleted his Twitter account now. So I think he added.
It's every few months. He just keeps cycling back.
So I saw him yesterday when I was out to practice, and right now he's off Twitter again. He's got a second Twitter account that's not as well followed, but I think allows him to still go out and see things. But he knows that sometimes Twitter is a bad road for him. But it's certainly just people helping with those relationships, and then getting to know them, and showing your face and being places. And if Owen Power, even like yesterday, like they told me, Owen Power, this is Scott Powers is here from The Athletic, and we trust him. So we talked for a while, and then if the Blackhawks draft Owen Power, I would think that he remembers me, and maybe that's something that you develop that relationship over time. So I know with some of the prospects too, that's been good for me too. Just the beat writers don't have as much time to do the prospect stuff, and I've really enjoyed that. And going out to I went out to London to see Adam Boquist, or when Dylan Secura was pretty good, I went to Northeastern. And then it's cool just to kind of step away from the pro stuff and go to some college rinks or some junior places. It's been kind of fun to kind of to see other parts of the game that I also had to learn about, just like the NHL.
Well, you already mentioned how you came on board to the Blackhawks, beat 7 years ago, and you've seen the ups and downs of a championship team and then some maybe leaner years. And maybe I shouldn't frame it like that. What are some things that stand out for you that differentiate a championship team from a team that doesn't quite make it?
Drafting well, and then having guys on the contracts they need to be. When Kane and Taves were at a more affordable rate, like you can make some mistakes. When Kane and Taves are at $10.5 million, and then you add Seabrook at $7 million, it becomes a problem. Like it just. And even now, like we wrote about it today when Bowman got promoted. It's I don't think the Blackhawks they shouldn't have struggled as much as they did. Like they had Panarin, they didn't have to trade him when they did. They didn't have to trade Jarmelson when they did. Like there were some reactionary moves, and then there were some times where I don't know. There are bad decisions in there too. Like it's at some point you need to. You keep hold of some of those guys, and I feel like they've made some really smart moves signing European players, but then you trade away Panarin, or you trade away Cahoon, and like you draft Yoki Haru, and you finally have a defenseman who a top 4 defenseman potentially that they haven't been able to produce for a while. And then they trade him for Alex Nylander, and so a lot of those moves I feel like they've added up where when they were winning cups, they weren't making any mistakes, and you probably had a little bit more room for error because your contracts were a little bit better, and now they've been so far up against the cap. And then even last year when they had cap space, like they instead of really holding on to it, or maybe allowing some of the younger guys come up, they traded and then strangely enough they turned really quickly and decided we're going to go with this rebuild, and here they are now getting rid of Crawford and Saad, and watching it so far up close that I don't think all those mistakes were necessary. So I think there was some mismanagement of the cap and the roster. But it's hard to, like it's even when you saw the Blackhawks win in 2010, how many bodies they lost because of the cap, and then having to figure it out again. And
so do you think it's more on the management team and putting a roster together, or is there a difference between the guys and the group that you have that may or may not get them over the hump. Obviously, management's got to put them in a position, but once you have a team that looks like they can contend, is there a difference between those ones that, win the cup or fall just short?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it also comes down to the roster management, because I think like Caden Taves can't carry you the same way they used to be able to, and you need to put guys in place, and they have some pieces into DeBrincat and Kubalik. But when I look at the Blackhawks struggles, it's mostly defensively. So it's like you knew at some point Keith and Seabrook were going to tail off, and how do you fix that? So Keith can give you still a lot at 38 years old, but at some point you had to be preparing for like who's going to take him over. So the fact that Keith's still playing 25 minutes in the playoffs, like it just I think that's more on the Blackhawks than on Keith. Like you're just asking him to defy his age a little bit, where he's certainly a bit of a freak, but you need to put these guys in positions where, the fact that Taves still carries those minutes that he does. And I think you needed to figure out ways to replace them. And it's hard too, because they won, and then they wanted to reward people with contracts. And that's what happened with Seabrook. And certainly with Kane and Taves. And you understand Kane and Taves more just because, like they sell jerseys. They're the reason people come to the building. But the Seabrook contract was harder, I think, for a lot of fans to swallow, because they knew that Seabrook was already declining. You run out of cap space eventually, and you can have 3 or 4 guys making $40 million if they're Marner and Tavares and Matthews. But when it's guys on the tail ends of their career and certainly declining, it's a little bit harder. So
they didn't make the playoffs either, so no worries.
But with Toronto, I feel like it's a matter of chances, right? Like it's eventually you would think it clicks. So it's we'll see. I think they have some pieces now. I think the fact that they've really embraced the rebuild, because it seemed like in recent years they've been talking out both sides where we want to do a rebuild, but then you go out and get Mount and Dahan, and you kind of create stopgaps for Ian Mitchell and Bokus and all your young guys, and now they finally opened up those spots.
Hey, one thing I wanted to get to before we get too far away from it, and this is kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation, but I'm curious, when you watch a game, like you said, you didn't have a huge hockey background growing up, and so you kind of backdoored your way into this, which is, I think, amazing. And like Greg said, it's always interesting to kind of pick people's brains who didn't grow up immersed in the sport. When you watch a game now, maybe could you walk us through like what you look for, or like what sticks out to you like while you're watching a game, live or in person?
Yeah. So when I got hired by The Athletic, the Blackhawks wouldn't credential me. So it was like, well, you're covering the Blackhawks, but you're not covering it. So I had to figure out, how can I be different? What can I do? And looking back, it was probably the best thing for me, because there wasn't a whole lot of analysis and video stuff. So it made me watch the games differently. So I started cutting clips and why did this work, and analyzing it. And I think slowing it down certainly helped. Like you get a better understanding while you're watching the game in person. There's so many different, like you're distracted by the crowd and what happened. And I never feel like I ever have a true sense of what occurred until I watch multiple replays, and, watching the game at my own speed, and then cutting clips, and then, kind of analyzing and trying to figure out, and then asking questions. I've certainly, relied on people that, figure out why this worked, or why this didn't work, and understanding systems. And so I think now even yesterday I watched Owen Power in that skill session, and then talked to Adam Nicholas, and then I went home and watched Owen Power's Michigan's recent game against Minnesota, and I just watched a period, and you can see all the stuff that he did. And I think I cut 7 clips for the story tomorrow, and I actually sent him the Adam Nicholas, kind of explaining what I saw, and kind of verify it too, because there's sometimes I feel like I know enough, but I'm not going to pretend like I know everything. And certainly it's been helped to bounce things off of those guys too. So even talking to when I talked to you and Adam in Florida last year, it's like it's getting a different understanding of how guys skate. And I'm sure you guys shooting videos of that camp too, like you get a different appreciation of the skating moves and the different what they're seeing, and even just the details of it. Like the fact that I don't really know how to skate, like I feel like there's another level that eventually my daughter's 3 now, and after the pandemic I want to teach her how to skate and maybe get out there on myself. And I think there's another layer that I can learn about hockey, and maybe some of it's me getting on the ice a little bit more and understanding, edges and different things too. So just I think it's more of its constant, curiosity and really realizing I don't have everything, but also having to put time into it. Like it was, I wasn't happy when the Blackhawks didn't credential me when I first started the Athletic, but looking back, it really was the best thing for me to have to watch the game differently and try to, cut those clips and then explain what I saw to readers. And I feel like I'm better at that. And then certainly when, during the Blackhawks and the return to play playoffs, it was like, well, you have the same access as everyone, and you're dealing with the same Zoom calls. How do you differentiate yourself? And some of it was through analysis, and so it was. I'm not where I want to be in there, but I certainly feel like I've progressed, and it's been a different, fun way to understand the game, and it's I'm looking forward to what else I can kind of pick up in the coming years.
That's awesome stuff. I'm loving all the details you're getting into here, and there's so many ways to go about this. I think there's a lot of people curious, and I know you're not as involved with the Chicago Steel, but actually curious of how they're operating their program and how they've been able to get the results they've gotten. So curious through your experience with Ryan Hardy, Adam Nicholas, Daryl Belfry, what makes the Steel so special? How are they operating maybe on a daily basis to improve their kids and have so many first rounders and so many draft picks that are doing well and guys that are going on to success at the college level and soon be the pro level as well?
Yeah, I wrote a story about this. It must have been a couple of years now when they kind of got things going. And at that point, Daryl and I hadn't really started on the book. So I knew Daryl pretty well, but he, you know what it was? The Steel obviously have a lot of money. And I remember, I think they hire another PR firm too. So like they have their media relations guy, but they also have a PR firm. And someone reached out to me with the story idea. And these are the type, like you get PR emails and you usually just ignore them. But, it had a Belfry's name on it. And it, I follow the Steel enough, like you have an idea what's going on. But this story intrigued me. And then, talking to Daryl about it a little bit and then going out there and talking to Ryan Hardy. And, at that point, Greg Moore was still coaching the team. And it was fascinating, the fact that they were willing, I think a lot of teams talk about development, but it feels like it's two different departments, right? Like you have the guy, the skills guy, skills analyst who goes on the ice with the player, and then the coach comes on later, and there's not they're not overlapping. And with the Steel, what they've done is everyone's been on the same page, like they share ideas. What should we do in the skills session, and then how do we translate it into practice, and how does this work in a game, and then allowing the players to make mistakes. Like it's we're going to try this, and everyone's they don't necessarily play, everyone is out of not everyone's playing forward or defense, and they're it's not like it's just universal positions, but they very much are playing. We want our defensemen involved in the offense, and like they're moving all over, and you see that in Owen Power's game now. It just how deep he gets in the offensive zone and how he wants to lead the rush, and it's everyone kind of having each other's back, but this freedom to to try things and then to fail, and then in time succeed. When I did that story, Owen Power just I think he was still pretty fresh to the Steel. So I actually talked to him a few years ago, and he was still a kid, and they saw a lot in him. And then so you're playing with younger guys and taking chances, and I think over time they've gotten better players. I mean, the fact that now they have Brisson's kid, I think that's helped, and it helps create better relationship, more players there. And I don't think U.S. Hockey's probably happy about the Chicago Steel. This is not exactly great for their business in some ways, and their game on their last game, the Steel were, I think they allowed 7 shots, through 2 periods, and had, almost 40 themselves. I mean, they're scoring 5-6 goals a game. Defensively, they're pretty good. They're producing talent now. Guys are really developing, and especially it's interesting covering hockey. I feel like that's been the thing, is everyone talks about developing, producing players, but there aren't a lot of people that do it. Blackhawks can say they develop players, but you draft someone and then you're usually handing them over to, if it's college, you're handing them over to a program for 3 years, and you have hands on them, a few times a year, and you're talking to them. But mostly development's happening at the college or at the at major junior or wherever. And for the few years they were at the Steel, like they're really like that's real development, like you're seeing guys get better. And yeah, I'm certainly sold on what they're doing. And, it's, I think the proof is in their record and the players that are producing. And I would assume that a lot of, if I'm an AHL team or any team right now, I'm probably trying to copy what it's hard because ultimately they've paid Adam Nicholas and Joe Belfry, two guys who work with NHL players to come work at the USHL. So it's not, it's not exactly repeatable, but it's, I think it's definitely opened some eyes. And yeah, it kind of, really shows you what developing, how to develop and what development can look like.
Yeah, and they just got Adam Fantilli, who might be a first overall pick. I want to say 2023. Dan, I know you're better on those dates than I am. And
That sounds right, but don't put me on the spot.
He's a phenomenal player. I know.
Got him out of Canada too. That was a big get.
That was huge because he was about to be the number one pick in the OHL. Shane Doan's kid, Josh, is over there. They got some serious talent. So it's great to see what they're doing. And Ryan Hardy is a good guy. Dan and I both were talking to him when he came to visit Columbus, which I believe is his favorite town. I think he likes Columbus better than Chicago. So we got that one on you guys.
No comment.
I'll have to have a talk with him.
Oh, it's all about Pins Mechanical. Best place in town. Best place in town. So we've actually had some guys, Ted Soikinen specifically, talk about what they're doing overseas. And it seems like Chicago Steel are doing that, where they're treating these guys like pros and really valuing their development. I think meals might be catered for them all the way through the organization, really focusing on getting them the proper development. So I'd be curious to read more on the Chicago Steel. I think a lot of people that are coaches are looking towards that to see what they're doing, because it's the first time someone's been able to really make the U.S. National Development Program really have to compete for talent. So it's been cool to see.
Yeah, that story that I did, it really wasn't given a lot of juice behind it. I almost feel like I want to rewrite it or push it out there, because I think it's even more significant now, because at that point they were just kind of on the cusp of creating something. And then, what they did last year in the USHL and what they're doing now, and the fact that they've had more players drafted, I think it's a bigger story. And at some point it's going to be broken up, like an NHL team is going to come along, and I'm sure NHL teams have already talked to Ryan Hardy, but he can, the fact that the money's probably decent with the Steel, and he certainly loves what he's doing, that, he can be a little picky. And, like Belfry and Nicholas, I assume that an NHL team probably wants to hire them full time. And even now, like, the coaches, you've seen Greg Moore get promoted, and I think you'll see more of those people go on to jobs, because I think a lot of NHL teams are interested in people who are having success, the junior level, and hoping to kind of duplicate that. And it'd be interesting to take what the Steel are doing and take it to the next level and give them an American League team or something, and see what that is. Because yeah, I guess the more that I've covered, the NHL, it's like you just, if someone's in the American League too long, I guess all my stuff is based around my coverage of, having covered the Blackhawks. But if you're in the American League too long, like, it's a bad thing. Like, if you're good enough, like a Teravainen or a Nick Schmaltz, those guys stay in there 20 games and they get promoted. I'm doing a story on Jeremy Morin, who's done some skill stuff now too, and he's a guy who spent too much time in Rockford, and like it becomes like this negative stereotype where, when you look back in the past, and guys like John Wilson and Duncan Keith actually spent 2 or 3 years in the AHL, and it was fine. And it feels like guys get more accelerated, so it's hard to define what development is. And I'd really be curious to see. And I think Toronto's a little bit ahead of the curve in this with who they've, with whom they've hired to do it. But if you take what the Steel are doing and try to use that model in the AHL, and maybe not worry so much about the results, at least first off, but just allowing guys to take chances and be risky. And I think there might be something there. And obviously I could be wrong, but I'd be curious to see what they're doing and placing it somewhere else at even a higher level.
All right, last one for me, and this one's a little bit of a softball, and it's also off topic, so I apologize on maybe both fronts. So media row at a hockey game, it's about as high as you can sit, at least at most stadiums that I've been to. Do you think that is advantageous to learning the game or seeing plays? I guess what I'm asking is it the best seat in the house, or are they putting the media scribes in the non-paying seats for a reason?
I don't think you appreciate the speed and what, like it's you don't see everything exactly as it's going on. Like, I don't think you appreciate the skill and if someone has great hands or how fast they are, but it allows you to see the whole ice. And that's probably what's important to us, is seeing the whole, and there are some buildings where you don't see the whole ice, like if you're, was it San Jose or something, like there's beams in the way in certain places, and the visiting media doesn't always get the best vantage point. But yeah, I think for what we do, and we're certainly always given TV, so you're watching replays if you really need it. But yeah, at least to see the whole ice, I think that's the key for us. And then you also know that we're not a paying customer, and like they have the probably even better views for someone who has the money. So
I've always enjoyed sitting high up. I don't know. I get made fun of. My friends make fun of me because I like sitting in the bleeders, but I like that you can see the whole game develop, and it's easy. Like you just said, you can really see the play develop. And when I go to a game, that's what I'm there for.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Either front row or up in the nosebleeds. Those are the only two ways to go. Either you need to see the speed up close and realize that as much as you think you can play, and you're like, oh yeah, if I was, XYZ, I could totally play in the NHL. No way possible. It's just way too fast. And then up top, you can actually really see the space and the lanes and how the play develops. It's pretty awesome. Again, Scott, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it. This was awesome. I really enjoyed your stories and understanding how you learned the game and have operated around the best in the business. I mean, Chicago's a great place to be. And thanks again for coming on.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, guys.
Take care, Scott.
Thank you for tuning into the Hockey IQ podcast. We are Hockey's Arsenal, Greg Revac and Dan Dukart. Together, we've come together to create a platform and a community to expand on hockey intelligence, hockey IQ, whatever you want to call it. We're very passionate about seeing this game played smarter and better, and continue to develop itself to the next level and staying on the cutting edge of things. So you can find us at Hockey's Arsenal on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We're also at hockeysarsenal.com. From there, you can find some resources and some options to work with us. We're excited to continue this. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, follow, and share. You can also join up for our newsletter as well, where we're going to tackle anything Hockey IQ related. So we're excited to have everyone here and continue to build.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch you beauts here next week for a brand new episode.